Children with ADHD are a challenge, especially when it comes to discipline, because they seem to be fairly impervious to the normal kinds of discipline. Certainly, they don't understand when you are getting angry because they don't understand the content of language, the emotional content of language. They don't understand the subtleties of language. If you really scream at them, they just switch off, so they're not going to listen to you. And lastly, if you should spank them, it doesn't seem to have much effect. So it can be quite frustrating to try and have these children's behavior improve. Now, I'm not going to be discussing things like being organized, running a tight ship, having things happen on the same time every day. All of these things help children with ADHD to cope. The work lists, star lists, duty lists, all of these things may help. But I sometimes think parents get really frustrated when they have to discipline their children with ADHD because nothing seems to really work. Well, there's a few things that are important. First of all, if there are two parents, they must at least agree on what they're going to do with their child. You cannot have two parenting styles in one household. For most children, this will not work, but for children with ADHD, this is a real disaster. They need very strict rules and regulations, which they know that both parents are going to enforce to really function. And both parents must be organized. They must know exactly what's going to happen, and the day-to-day activities need to be scheduled and must be timed. The problem is very often one of the parents have ADHD, so it makes this whole thing very difficult. And especially if the mother has the ADHD, of course, this is even more challenging, but one has to try. So first of all, both parents have to decide how they're going to manage their child, and secondly, they must both decide what are the behaviors that they're going to target. There is no way you can target every single behavior of an ADHD child, and I always tell parents, choose the top 3 that irritate you most and really zone in on those. And remember, it takes 6 months to change a behavior, and you have to be consistent and persistent to get that to happen. Screaming at these children does not work well. The way to speak to them is in a soft voice, using not too many words, and it can be a little bit clipped, a little bit cold. They are sensitive to not being attended to, so not giving all your attention is kind of a punishment for children with ADHD. You know, mothers, when you are angry with your husband and they're coming home at 10 o'clock after a golf game, and you said, well, good evening, I hope you had a good night, because I've had a dreadful night, those children have not gone to bed. You know, that sort of clipped, cold way of speaking. That works for ADHD very well. Much better than shouting. The minute you shout, they just think, there's mom going off again, and they don't actually listen. So, cool, detached talking. Not too many words, say exactly what you want to say, and not a lot of fondling and holding and touching when you are angry. Second thing is make very clear what you are angry about. Now, what about the sort of punishments? I think the reason most parents hit their children is because they either got such a big fright when the child did something really impulsive, or they have just don't know what next to do. The child has exhausted everything that they've got and anything that's left. So you have to have a few things up your sleeve, is that one should have a rule of 3s in your house. Most parents have this for most of their children. The rule of 3 says you only speak 3 times, but in ADHD this is very specific. It has a few components. You have to say the name. You have to say how manyth time you are saying this, and you have to be very clear on the instruction. So it would be something like this. John, this is the first time I'm telling you, pick up your trousers. You must not even embark on this if you are not going to follow it up. So when you've said it, not more than 10 minutes, you have to go back and say, John, this is the second time I'm telling you, pick up your trousers. Now, if for a miracle the child did it the first time, immediately when you said it, of course you have to gush. You have to praise him, you have to move in there, you can then hug and kiss, do everything you like, but you have to make it clear that that kind of behavior is something you really like. But when you speak the second time and they do it, there is no reward, besides maybe saying thank you. But we are not going to gush now. But the child needs to know that the minute you say, this is the first time I'm saying this, that this train is going to go to the third time and you will do it or you will be punished. So you're not going to use this for little things like, don't scratch your nose. That's not where you're going to use it. You're going to use it where you really want the child to listen to what you're saying. And then if you have to say it the third time, they must do it immediately. And if they don't, they will be punished. Now, punishment in ADHD is quite difficult. I think things like bedtime is a good punishment. You go to bed 10 minutes earlier. It hardly makes a difference to the family, but it makes a big difference to a child with ADHD. So manipulating the bedtime doesn't cost you any money. You can do it immediately that night, and it can be sort of cause and effect. You can use any other thing you want to punish them, but something that happens fairly quickly after they have not done what you want them to do, and they must still do what you want them to do before they are punished. Many children are, of course, bribed. And often parents sit in my office and they get a little bit sheep-faced and they say, well, if I don't bribe him, he doesn't do anything. Actually, bribing's okay. But it's the way you bribe children that becomes important. In fact, all of these issues are for normal functioning children too, but in ADHD they work quite well. The problem most parents have with children that when they bribe them is that the bribe doesn't work. And the reason for that is because there's no negative effect. If we only positively bribe children, they have the power to say no. And then what happens? Well, nothing can happen. So the issue is, if you go and pick up the leaves in the garden, I'll buy you an ice cream. The answer will be, I don't like ice cream, it's winter anyway, and I'm not going to pick up the leaves. Then what are you going to say? But if you said, if you pick up the leaves in the garden, I'll buy you an ice cream, but if you don't pick up the leaves, then you're going to bed an hour earlier. That has a different connotation. There has to be a positive and a negative. It's no use saying, eat all your food, otherwise we're not visiting grandmother on Friday. The answer would be, I don't want to go to grandmother on Friday, and then what do? So be careful what bribes you use, but always put the negative, because it's the negative that really makes them take the positive, not the positive that drags them along. They love money, and they love possessions. You can usually bribe them, but be really careful not to abuse those two. I think children should be bribed with attention, by having a milkshake with mother or father or something like that, that is a positive interaction rather than with goods and toys and money. The third thing is timeout. It has been shown by many researchers that it's the only effective punishment in ADHD. But timeout can be very different. Timeout doesn't mean I'm going to lock you in the bathroom. In fact, I don't think any child should ever be locked in a bathroom or in a toilet. It's scary, and they can do a lot of damage there to themselves and to your property. So timeout should be much more subtle than that. You can time them out in their bedroom. I think children that have meltdowns or temper tantrums can certainly be removed to their bedroom and be told you can come out when you can speak properly or you've calmed down, which is completely fine. But you can also have a much more subtle kind of timeout, and that means that somewhere in the house you identify a timeout chair, and it should really be in the kitchen, and that chair could have a name. You could call it Alcatraz or the Chucky, whatever you like, and when you misbehave, you go to the chair. That chair, once you're on it, means that nobody's allowed to talk to you, you can't watch television, you can't read a book, you have to sit there. And why I'm saying the kitchen is because usually things go really bad when mother's cooking in the afternoon. That's when most things go bad. That's when the medication is worn off, that's when the child is irritated, that's when mother's irritated, she's got things to do and father's not yet home to help. So time out on a chair works well. You don't have to negotiate the time. You set the alarm on the stove until the time is up. We usually say 1 minute per age plus another minute. And when it's up, they can come out. While they're on the chair, you must ignore them because that's the punishment. And so if they're sitting there and say, can I get up now? Can I get up now? And you say, if you ask me one more time, you've already spoiled the timeout. You may not answer them. When dad comes home and they're sitting on the Chucky, he doesn't speak to them until the time is up. When the time is up, you can repeat why they sat on their Chucky, but then things have to normalize. If you're pretty good at this, you can time them out anywhere. You can time them out in your car. You can just say, well, John is now timed out. I know there's a teacher that usually says, you don't exist anymore. I think that's quite cruel. But the same principle. For that time, I will not attend to you, and you will not have my attention. And you can do it anywhere eventually. Everybody knows when it's time out, everybody stops talking to the child until the time is up, or that the child has come back to the conversation with some other rule that you've set in place. Timeout in classrooms is a problem, though. Sending the child out of the class to stand outside the door is not a good idea. They love it because they usually go walk around, they go to the playground, they are not particularly worried. So timeout has to be inside the classroom. Have a desk that faces the wall. You can call it the office. If you can't behave yourself, you go to the office. You have to sit there. It's not a joke. Nobody's going to laugh. You have to face the wall, but you're still part of the classroom. When your time is up, you'll come back to your desk. So one must be careful that timeout is not used against you, and that one must be clever about this. So really, good and bad bribes and timeout is the only things you have to manipulate behavior in your house. There's one other trick, though, and that's rules. Children with ADHD love rules. And the nice thing about rules is you can make them up. I mean, as you go along, so it doesn't have to be a long-standing rule. But for instance, a child that cries every time you go to the supermarket because they want a toy. The rule is then you cannot cry in the supermarket. You say that on the way to the supermarket, you say it when you stop there, you say it again when you walk into the supermarket. If they could repeat it, it would be good, but they usually refuse. And you say, what is the rule of the supermarket? The rule of the supermarket is you may not cry at the toys. So then we set them up for success. You're going to start in the aisle with a soap, not very threatening. And by the time you're down the aisle of the soap, you turn to the child and say, gosh, you haven't cried yet. I'm really proud of you. And you're going to build them up so that by the time you get to the toys, you might get them to not cry because you've really built their confidence up to such an extent, and you keep praising them. And then once you pass the toys, you can bribe them with a sweet at the till. So you can use all of these together, but rules work very well. The rule in my office is you're not allowed to jump on my sofa. That's the rule. So any child that does that, I just say, that's the rule, and you get off. No child has ever argued the point. So rules work well for children with ADHD. The challenge for parents is dealing with children who are oppositional. These children where you say, pick up your trousers, and the child just says, I won't. That's really frustrating. And what normally would happen in those conditions is that you will elevate your voice and say, I told you to pick up the trousers. And of course, that's now going to lead into an escalated fight, an argument, of which there will be no victors in the end. The trick here is to use this as an educational opportunity. I know that sounds a bit vague, but the thought is that children that are oppositional react in opposition because they are in positions where they do not know how to react properly. And so the easiest thing then is to be oppositional. And although this is a big discussion, I really want to just zoom in on what do you say when a child says they won't. And I'll keep with this example that we've used. If you said, pick up your trousers, say, I won't. What you say next is in your friendliest possible voice is to say, so you're not going to pick up the trousers. This now sets the whole discussion in a different path. It's not aggressive. It's not confrontational. That child has never, ever thought about it, actually, because your next question is going to be, why not? And they don't have an answer for that, because that's not what they were thinking. They were just thinking they were not going to do that. Right. Then you start with 3 possible solutions. Well, maybe you don't like your trousers, so maybe we should pick it up and throw it to the dustbin. I'm giving a stupid example. Or maybe we should pick up the trousers with the other toys in the room. Or whatever the 3 possibilities are. Just make sure that the 3 possibilities are all doable and that you are okay with those outcomes. Most of the time, children will just grab one because they've never thought about this further. They'll say, we'll do that, and then you'll say, well, that's great. Then that's what we'll do, and then that's what you do. You just start teaching them then how to solve a dilemma without being oppositional. It sounds easy, but it works every time. But the clue is not to escalate the violence, but to just quietly say what they said so that they understand that you heard them. You ask them why. If they give you a reason why, of course you have to work around that. Because I don't want to is not a reason. And then you have to give them 3 possible solutions, of which they usually will choose one. Just by doing that, as I said, this can get more complicated, you can stop them from going to this mode of every time saying, I won't. But if something persists, for instance, a child who fights you with homework every afternoon, and every afternoon there's a drama, you can wait till you have had a good day and you're putting them to bed, and then you sit on the bed and you say, every day we have to do homework, we fight. What's up? And then you go through the same issues. Maybe you don't want to do homework because you want to watch some television program first. Maybe you want to do homework because you want to play. Maybe whatever. And if they choose one, you solve that problem. You write it down, you make them sign, you put it on the door. Next day, when you're starting to do homework and there's any drama, you take them there and say, we've already sorted this out. That was the decision. Now we're doing it. So that you don't have to go through this whole negotiation every day, because that can be quite exhausting.